So, Britain has a new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, from the left-wing Labour Party. This man visited elite universities. He received a title of nobility. He had a very special status as a legal expert for the crown for the entire empire. So how does that even work? How can you be a leftist and be so privileged? Let me explain how that works in Britain. The entire Labour Party is the project of the empire, specifically the Privy Council. Now, Britain, of course, more or less faked its own Enlightenment era. They were really clever about this. More clever than their competitors like France. They had this bloody revolution and they tried different things. Whereas Britain was very calm. As the old saying goes, keep calm and carry on. So this was a controlled transition from the old system into a more modern appearing system. Now, of course, the empire very early on had sophisticated, large-scale intelligence agencies, which were family-based. So this was before the modern agencies like the MI5 or the MI6. So once you have the money and you have the intelligence structures, you have the experience and you control the universities anyway, you can control the new political system from the left to the right. This is not very hard to do. Now, of course, you know, even in the old system, there were privileged people in the regular population, and these privileged people, they then became the conservatives because they had a lot to lose from change. Then you had sort of the middle ground in the population. They had something to lose, something to gain. They became the political middle. And then you had those people who had nothing to lose, really. They wanted the most change, and this became the political left. Now, of course, in the past, it was much more easy to control these radical circles, especially the left, because there was no legal protection like you would expect in a modern state. Now today, for example, in the United States, you can always, you know, get a lawyer when you're in trouble. You can shut up and not talk to the police. Let the lawyer do the talking. There's the press that you can sort of rely on to a degree if this is a high-profile case or a very interesting case. But in Europe, in the past, the government could do anything. You know, they could use all kinds of dirty tricks. They could always get a warrant or fake a warrant or whatever. And so, yeah, this is not the situation that some people assume it to be, you know, from the political left nowadays. You know, they thought, well, the left just became powerful and then sort of, you know, changed the government and became a political force and whatnot. But it was really the British Empire running the whole thing. So, with the Labour Party, you had a guy called Ramsay MacDonald, one of the founders of the Labour Party. Then you had Keir Hardie and a man called Arthur Henderson. This was founded in the year 1900, roundabout. MacDonald was a member of the Fabian Society, and he was connected to the London School of Economics. These, of course, were the tools of the empire to create a British brand socialism. And this was all meant to give the empire a modern touch, because the old ways of imperialism were dying out. You couldn't just use force everywhere. It's becoming too complicated and expensive. So it was more advisable to use intelligence methods, secret methods, to maintain control, business methods, ruling through political and economical front organizations. Very baseline strategy. And so, yeah, they needed their own socialism, so they made one. So MacDonald became the first Labour Prime Minister in 1924. King George V basically ordered him to create a government without having a majority. And MacDonald then married a woman who was a descendant of Lord Kelvin, who was from the elite Privy Council. Lord Haldane back then became Lord Chancellor, and Philip Snowden became also very important in that government. Haldane was a member of the Privy Council, highest orders of the empire, and this is not just a token of appreciation. If you get one of these high-level medals, you become member of a club, and there's privileges, but there's also demands, very strong demands. And Haldane was also connected to the Fabians, of course. Viscount Philip Snowden, also a member of the Privy Council, and he wanted to have this British brand socialism different from Soviet Russian Bolshevism. Now, of course, if you read my books, there's a whole nother level to this East-West connection. Now, on the highest levels of the British Empire, on the highest levels of the aristocracy, these very, very old families, they have a strange relationship. They had a strange relationship with the Soviets, a very secret relationship, and we don't know exactly what it is, but we can surely figure out the main scenarios, what went down. And one scenario, for example, is that Britain had supported the Bolsheviks, especially with the revolution and afterwards. For various reasons, they wanted to burn Russia to the ground so it wouldn't be that much of a problem, and prevent other things from happening, and so on and so forth. But then this whole plan went sideways, and the Bolsheviks became too powerful and too dangerous, and the communists then infiltrated Britain through their spies. Therefore, the high-ranking Brits had to settle with the communists in a secret deal. Intelligence sharing and other stuff. So there's some very, very dark scenarios that I have looked at in detail, just so you understand that whole background. This guy, Mr. Starmer, the new prime minister, Starmer is a smart man, but of course he knows how to play dumb. So 20 years ago in a documentary, he said he has no idea why the system would make him a Queen's Counsel. It's just giving him this elite status because he was always against the monarchy, he said. So, this is weird. They're giving me all this status, that they basically trust him 100% because they control him 100%. But he just plays dumb towards his own crowd. Like, he has no idea what's going on. In 2014, he was kneeling before Charles, now of course King. He became a Knight of the Order of the Bath. And in 2017, Starmer became a member of the Privy Council, following this tradition of controlled socialism with the Labour Party. Charles was, of course, influenced by Lord Louis Mountbatten, who had his strange connections to the USSR. Very interesting case. You can find a video on this on my channel. Starmer studied at Oxford, and he was publishing a socialist rag, which was kind of Marxist and Trotskyite. These people attached to the magazine, they all came from elite circles. Guys like Raymond Williams studied at Cambridge, joined the Communist Party of Britain. Then you had the Miliband's. It was once Ralph Miliband, and his two sons, David and Ed Miliband, became very, very powerful in the Labour Party. 2008, Mr. Starmer becomes the leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. So this is a very, very privileged position. So we can pretty much tell who's calling the shots. So, and there was an interesting chapter in history when it came to the Labour Party, and this was the Harold Wilson era. So the Harold Wilson government was so horrifying, and many people in that government were so suspicious because of their communist ties to the Soviet Union, This was so outrageous that powerful conservatives, not the most high-ranking guys, but very powerful conservatives, became so shocked they actually contemplated a soft coup d'etat. He said, we need to get rid of Wilson and these people who are probably Soviet agents. We got to do something. You know, we have to involve the military if we have to, you know, to keep order. And we need to recruit these powerful people from the royals to give this legitimacy. So these conservatives then started talking to Lord Louis Mountbatten from the old House of Hessen. They wanted to recruit him for this soft coup, right? But he wasn't having it. You know, Mountbatten, who was very suspicious himself, he said, "I'm too old. This is not. I can't see myself being part of this thing." So he was not supporting that, even though people thought he would. Yeah, and then James Angleton, legendary spy catcher from the CIA and the Americans. James Angleton went to the Brits, to the MI5, and said, I have a super source. You know, this was a defector from the USSR. And this source tells me, and that source tells me that Wilson in Britain is a Soviet spy, and some other guys. Several people were named as Soviet spies, among which was Joseph Kagan, very close friend of Wilson. So yeah, this was kind of the situation. So these were not just some, you know, stupid right-wing wannabe fascists who just didn't like anything left. This was a very serious situation. Wilson, of course, framed it in a different way. He basically said that these evil right-wingers, they just want to smear him and make him look like a Soviet agent. So then, yeah, if you look at the background of Wilson, he had his private secretary, Marcia Williams, the Baroness Falkender. They both traveled to the USSR repeatedly. They met with Khrushchev and these kind of people. And the MI5 became increasingly worried, just like the CIA. They even thought that Wilson's predecessor, Gateskill, may have been killed. He may have gotten killed by Soviet agents to make way for Wilson. Wilson once worked for a corporation that had dealings with the Soviet Union. They imported timber and stuff like that from the Soviets. And so Wilson and his secretary, they made 19 trips to the Soviet Union. And of course, if you travel to the Soviet Union, you can talk to anybody and do all kinds of things. And it's really hard for the Brits to figure out what happens during these visits. Of course, Wilson was using the MI5 when he needed it to smear his opponents. Like when the sailors were on strike in 1966. Yeah, so then Wilson, eventually, he was out by the year 1970. Edward Heath came in. He was also a very suspicious guy. Yeah, that was kind of interesting chapter in history. So yeah, and Lord Louis Mountbatten, he was not willing to take part in a soft coup against the Wilson government. As I said, secret stuff happened between Britain, the highest levels of Britain in the USSR, and Mountbatten was involved in all of that. Now, there's strong indications that Mountbatten was some sort of a super mole or a gigamole, a collaborator with the Soviets, sort of a secret pact, a working relationship, and that may have included installing more Soviet moles in the British system, and that also affected American operations to a degree. And also, Britain had some very significant networks in the United States. You know, this goes back to the days of the American independence. So the Brits eventually stopped with the regular warfare in the revolution, but they continued the intelligence war indefinitely. And so when Britain had these networks in America, and once Britain had this secret relationship with the Soviets, that created a very big problem for America. The British Fabian Society was a creation of the empire. The London School of Economics was a factory for these new politicians. Many politicians came out of these institutions. People in India, former colony. People like Nehru, then people in Pakistan and all these places. And even in the West now, many current politicians, they visited the London School of Economics or are members of the Fabians or attached to the Fabians. A predecessor of the Fabians was the organization Fellowship of the New Life. Very elitist, of course. The co-founder, Havelock Ellis, he was a very strange scientist, was also a vice president then of the Eugenics Society. Another co-founder, Edward Carpenter, he was the teacher of the future King George V. Another founder, Edward Pease, was related to the Judge Sir Edward Fry, super elite guy, connected to more elite guys. Then you had the Webbs, they were involved with the London School of Economics. Sidney Webb was the Baron Passfield, member of the Privy Council, tied to the whole colony, administration system. The Webbs were also big fans of Joseph Stalin. They continued to support the Stalin system. Interesting, right? Beatrice Webb was the Baroness Passfield. So this is not what people think of when they think of leftist politicians. There was also another predecessor to the Fabians, was called the Coefficients Club, full of colonial guys like Leo Amery, also intelligence person. Edward Grey, first Viscount Grey of Falodon, also member of the Privy Council, Deputy Lieutenant of the Crown. And you had Alfred Milner, the first Viscount Milner, also Privy Council and administrating the empire. This is Fabianism, and they even tell that in their own writings, or some of the writings, that this is just about continuing the empire, doing it in a more smart way, and giving it a new coat of paint, so to say, a new style of marketing. So when you look at Britain today, especially England, it seems like such a miserable place. The big industry is kind of gone. Prices are high. Living standards are bad. Most people, they don't make much money at all. Seems like a miserable place. So where's the glory, people are asking? Where is, the old dominance, Britannia rules the waves and all that? Where is that? Well, it's still there, but it's hidden. You still have the City of London, and you still have that system of offshore banks and corporations. It's like a system of rings. You have the City of London kind of in the middle, and you have these islands like Guernsey and Jersey, and then you have these little island states administered by the Crown where many corporations are registered, or fractions of the corporations are registered. So this is kind of the same thing that intelligence agencies do every day. They create front organizations, they hide true ownership, they hide who's really running the shots. And don't fall for regular standard conspiracy mythology. This was just a silly ploy by the British themselves, British intelligence. They created this impression that the handful of Jews took everything over, which was not the case. The Rothschild family, for example, they worked for the Crown. And same with Barings and all these other families. This is just how the system works. Now, you get guys like Victor Rothschild. He was becoming, at some point, semi-official leader of part of the intelligence world. So this family always worked for the Crown. This is just how the system worked. So the empire is still there, and you're not supposed to see it that clearly. And it's very old families, or a cluster, a triple cluster of families. They're called Welfs, Vettins, and Reginars. Many people have never even heard these terms, even though specialized historians are perfectly aware of these names. And these sublineages, they have more commonly known names because they're named after the places they control or used to control, especially on German soil, like Hessen, Hanover, Sachsen-Coburg, and Gotha, in these places. So these names are more widely known. Very old family cluster, very big families, by the way. And they go back about 1200 years. They kept growing and they developed their own system of intelligence. They learned from the mistakes of other empires and other aristocracies, and they try to prevent these mistakes. So they put in a large emphasis on intelligence. They put a large emphasis on enlarging their own family. You had to be very loyal to the family. The group was more important than you, and you had to work hard. You know, you were not supposed to be showered with money early on and just waste your time and waste money on luxuries. You were expected to work and earn your place in that collective. And they created sort of fake capitalism. These aristocrats, things like the British East India Company. So people are still wondering, what was this thing? Was this a private corporation? Was this a government undertaking? Was it both? Do these people really care what it was? And the answer is not really. They just did what worked for them. And sometimes if you incorporated something, this was advantageous, because once something is called a private company, it doesn't have to be transparent. You know, the voters, they have no access to it. You know, you can do what you want. And sometimes you want to use a government vehicle, because then you can force things on people. You can take their money through taxes. And if you control the whole system, you can pretty much do what you want. So this is kind of how this system works. And there's even ties that are interesting when it comes to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, believe it or not. I got some notes about this here. Here is the section that I was looking for. Joe Biden often refers to his Irish ancestors, but in a speech he gave in 2013, he claimed to have had ancestors in the British colony of India. Quote, "In the 1970s, I received a letter from Mr. Biden in Mumbai claiming that we were related. He said that our mutual great-great-great-grandfather worked for the East India Trading Company and came to Mumbai. Biden later claimed the common relative's name was George Biden. Then Tim Willesee, visiting professor of war studies at King's College London, says it's more likely that the president was related to Christopher Biden, who indeed worked for the East India Company. And there's a similar background of Kamala Harris. So Britain became a big thing overseas. The East India Company was a very elitist affair. Only the chosen ones became truly rich. The new Indian civil service produced new cadres of administrators, such as the forebearers of Kamala Harris. So, in 1803, the Mughal emperor officially accepted British protection. This is how it works. So it seems like both Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have ties to India, as Harris's late mother was born in the South Asian nation. Interestingly, Christopher Biden lived and died in Madras, the very same place where Harris's mother was born. Harris's grandfather, said to be her inspiration, was an official for the British colonial empire in India. Shashithar Roy, Indian lawyer, politician, diplomat, said in his speech at the Oxford Union Society that Britain's rise was financed for 200 years by the plunder of the colony of India. It's also a pretty good book by him. It's called Inglorious Empire, What the British Did to India. Of course, regular historians were not happy about that study. Then if you look at some other politicians nowadays, Ursula von der Leyen in the European Union, she has an aristocratic background and she married into the aristocracy. Her family originally came from the Hanover area, the home of the Welfs, so to say, and there were these so-called pretty families back then, and pretty meant privilege. So if you served the nobles and they trusted you from one generation to the next, you had special status and you were giving more tasks, you had more privilege, but also they would demand more from you. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see that people from that privileged background now have a very important function in the European Union. Same with the Baring brothers became a banking house in England. This was the German Baring family, also a privileged family from that German area. Then Boris Johnson. There's another Boris Johnson is another example. He's a descendant of the aristocracy. Johnson is related to, or was related to, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles, now King Charles, through the royal house of Württemberg. Paul of Württemberg's mother was Auguste Caroline of Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel. This was, then the mini kingdom of Hanover, very important place. And some other ancestors of Boris Johnson also served the empire. This was some operations in Turkey. Right. So, and once you have this system of controlling universities, having all the spies everywhere, have your people everywhere, you can create a new banking system. And this became the Bank of England. And also these fake private merchant banks that I've mentioned. This was an invention by the empire. This was not a Jewish invention. This was not controlled by some little Jewish families. They hired a few Jewish families to work in that system. And this new system could then be scaled up and down depending on how you needed it to be. So that other empires, competing empires, would not immediately copy the new system. The British badmouthed their own system, through left-wing propaganda and right-wing propaganda. This was traditional conspiracy propaganda. So they told people, this is terrible. The system is Jewish and it's parasitic and it's capitalism and end-stage capitalism and imperialism and it's horrible and it's just bad. And it's not patriotic. They told the right-wingers it's not for the people, blah blah blah. And so this actually worked. People didn't really copy that system until much later. And so the French started to do it the same way, and the Germans wanted to do it the same way, but nobody was running it as well as the British did. So if you got the money, you can buy yourselves all kinds of things. You can buy yourself a political system, and especially you can buy yourself the left. Okay, so yeah, it's like a British brand of fake socialism. There's also the secret ties to the USSR that I talk about in other videos and in my books. You have to remember that real-life socialism for the people is not too different from traditional serfdom, right? Because as a serf, you basically had no real choices of how to work and what to earn. And you were just being ordered around. They gave you orders and you had to follow them. And so real-life socialism is pretty much the same thing. It's just another type of serfdom. This is very important to understand because regular political science is not good enough. It's not honest enough. It's very baseline. And it doesn't really touch upon these secret aspects of history. So we don't get convenient files on the past. When it comes to intelligence, there's not that nice situation where you can just take boxes of papers and go through them. You have to reconstruct the past, what the secret networks were and what the operations were. It's a very meticulous method. It's never perfect, but it's the best we can do. So check out my books. You can find them on Amazon. And check out some of the other videos on this channel, because this is really important to understand how the system really works and how it divides people, so they think they can be involved in their own fate, and people start hating each other based on their ideological preferences.